Okay, so if you're watching the live, say hi and drop your questions in the comment. If you are watching the replay, then drop your comments and I will get back to you with that as well, as quickly as I can, for example. And if you're if you're new here, for example, then I welcome you, and make sure that you also hit the like button, subscribe, and to really help us to reach more people. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe for more stacking, wealth building, and economic survival content, because we are everyday people, for example, but also some of you may be business owners and you're wondering, how are you going to cope with this inflation that's happening? Your staff wages are going up, things are costing more, for example, if you're a business owner. And you may have been through some, recessions previously. I've been through 3 recessions, for example, in my businesses, for example, and I've lost things as well. And what I want to say is that whether you're a business owner, whether you're working, whether you're planning for your retirement, then I believe that with the gold and silver, that is something that it stood the test of time. We know it has, we see it. Gold and silver has always stood the test of time, for example. And what I also want to mention to you is that what I saw just the other day, it was actually in China, where they actually had ATM machines, where people were putting in their gold, for example, or they was putting in their money, and then they would get gold coins and silver coins. And I think that's such a brilliant idea. I've never ever seen that before. I don't know whether you've seen that before, or whether you've noticed that there's actually ATM machines where you can get coins, or you can put in your gold, for example. Isn't that a remarkable thing to do? I think that's quite, where we're kind of going here, because gold and silver is going to actually be the monetary system, because the fiat, the cash money is dwindling. There's no value in it, for example. So, like I said, drop your comments in the chat and I'll try and answer them as best as possible, for example. So, some of the topics that we're going to be covering is gold too expensive now? Let's really talk about this. Gold is up for sure. Compared to what it was a year ago, for example, it's like $1,000 more per ounce, for example. But compared to the inflation and the destruction of the dollar, gold is still cheap in real terms, but it depends what you can afford. Not everyone can spend $3,320, for example. So that's why I always say one of my favorites is silver, for example. So think about the purchasing power, but not just the price. See, you're not just buying gold for today, you're buying it to buy for ahead, for the future. Don't look at it as it is today. Look at it for if and when you need to have that purchasing power. And this is what I was discussing today with a friend. I was having a coffee and we were talking about saying, we've got to really start looking at going back to basics, going back to our communities, because at the end of the day, if things were to go horribly wrong, we have a community. So we've got a community where there's people that do specialist things. And then we can then help one another. For example, you've got someone that fixes shoes, cobblers, we used to call them in the UK, for example. There's not many cobblers around these days. You know, persons that fixes shoes, because we tend to go and buy the shoes, for example. Seamstress, someone to make clothes, for example. Someone who is a farmer, where we can get food from. Someone who does vegetables, where we can get vegetables from. Someone where we can get milk from, for example. Because build it, and that's why I've also got a playlist about building a community, because I think it's so important. And then we've got our gold and silver coins, for example, where we can actually purchase things, for example. If the value, the inflation of the currency, for example, becomes the new silver and gold, for example, the monetary system. So what we're looking at, we're seeing so many different things. We can see that President Trump is, you know, putting an order in to start doing deep sea mining, for example. There's a lot of signs that we're seeing that there's a problem. For example, the tariffs being placed around the world, for example, that's putting more pressure on businesses, putting more pressure on people, everyday people, for us to go shopping, etc. So we've got to start thinking ahead and start planning, and even purchasing what we can afford, for example, is going to help us for the long term, because we don't know what is going to happen from the outcome from what's happening today. We can see that things aren't looking so great, but we don't know what the long-term effects are going to be, for example, because this is something which is new to some of you, for example. But I've been through 3 recessions, and there's a pattern that I'm seeing here that is happening. But this one seems to be a bit more stronger than before. The signs are just glaringly obvious, for example. So by having a strategy of stacking silver or gold, for example, building your wealth, preparing for your retirement, because at the end of the day, those that are saving for retirement, maybe you got a 401k, for example, or your pension fund, you don't know what your pension amount is going to be until it's that time for you to receive that pension amount.